All right, what's going on, everybody? Happy opening day. My name's Jordan Chan. I'm SaberSim's head coach, and a bit of a surprise stream here. I know, kind of short notice, but wanted to do a video here walking through how you can use SaberSim this season to beat MLB DFS. SaberSim was originally built for baseball. I think it's the perfect sport for sims. We had hundreds of different users that took down contests last year. Very excited for this season. This has also always been historically my best MLB, my best DFS sport is baseball. So what we'll do on this stream here today, I want to start with a couple mindset things just as we start the season that I think are helpful for long-term success playing DFS. We'll walk through what a strong contest selection portfolio looks like, which is a huge part of the puzzle here, and then do some builds. Basically walk through literally what I do when I build my lineups, which I think is a little bit simpler than people often think. I don't think you need to overcomplicate DFS to be successful. So if you have questions, you can ask them in the chat. That's a great place to do it. We'll have some time at the end to answer some questions. We do also have our typical office hours live stream later this afternoon. I think Andrew actually pulled that up a little bit. I think that kicks off in about 2 hours from now. So if you want some more opportunities to ask questions, probably see some builds from Andrew's perspective, you can join that as well. There will be some videos coming out here tomorrow as well. A video that will basically be kind of a more permanent version of what I'm going to walk through on this stream here today, a contest selection and building lineups guide, along with a late swap guide and a contest flashback guide. So you can expect those should all publish sometime tomorrow heading into the weekend. So check those out as well. But let's go ahead here and get into things. Pull up the slate. So I mentioned right at the start here a couple mindset things. I think the first one here is to keep your process simple. I think there is a misconception in general in DFS that more complexity means more profit. And that might be true on a traditional optimizer where the optimizer is going to take average projections and say that that's gospel. That's all that matters. And every other part of the strategy that actually matters to be successful, whether that's correlation in the form of stacking or coming up with the real ranges of outcomes of players and equating what a average projection means in terms of upside, or whether that means ownership and game theory, you have to do all of those different things. You have to program an optimizer to handle all of those different things. So in that way, your lineups your process does need to get increasingly complex to account for more things. On SaberSim, that is really, really, really not the case. Now, that does not mean that you can't add your takes. In fact, I think it's good to add your takes. I'll show how you can do that here in a second. But one of the bigger mistakes you can make with SaberSim is assuming that the more you do, the better your lineups are going to be. And I think at best, in practice, on SaberSim, the more stuff you start doing, the more stuff you pack into your process, the more time it takes to do your process. And also potentially the more damage you can do in terms of not letting the sims have an opportunity to cook. So it's a balance there. You want to add your takes when you have them. You want to add your research. There's a lot of value that can be added there, but you shouldn't be adding things for the sake of doing them. The other mindset thing I want to touch on right off the bat is this idea of committing to the season. Nobody wins every single night of DFS. In fact, most people lose most nights. The EV that you realize if you are a plus EV player, that comes from one or two big slates over the course of the season. You are realizing all of your profit at once. So most days are going to tend to be losing nights. And that is especially true in a sport like baseball. So if you are coming from NBA, you've been playing NBA the whole season, it is somewhat hard to get completely dusted on a night of NBA if you played well. It's not to say that can't happen, right? You sometimes just have those nights where you completely lose. But because it is such a projection driven sport, a lot of times if you played pretty well, you're going to have a handful of lineups that end up cashing, probably doing pretty well. Like the median outcomes are a little more common in terms of basketball because the players score around their projection more often. That's really not the case in baseball. Like you should really be prepared for nights where you played extremely well, where you check flashback the next day and you were plus EV and you just get totally dusted. And sometimes that racks up a few slates in a row. So it is really a long-term game and it's a long season, right? We've got basically the entire summer ahead of you. So the point of this is really not to scare anyone, but just to be honest about the reality of the way that baseball DFS works is that you are playing for the season. And I think setting that up front and saying, I'm committing to this season and kind of what that means that my goal is to realize my EV over the course of the season sets you up for success because it means short term swings are a little less impactful, just even to your mental mindset. And you're playing and managing your bankroll in a way that allows you to sustain that. So I think that's kind of the main practical takeaway here is that you should set up your bankroll. You should play an amount of money each night and plan on playing as many slates as possible. That allows you to weather the swings over the course of the season. If you are looking for an exact number of what that means, I think somewhere around 2.5 to 5% of your bankroll makes sense for a main slate. I have pulled back a little bit from giving very explicit bankroll management advice because the fact is everybody's coming at this from a different spot. Like you might be in a situation where you have the money that you're setting aside for MLB DFS season is it, and if it's gone, you're done. That is different from somebody that maybe is prepared to deposit a little more if they need over the course of the season, or if you're playing this with a little bit more comfort to have some entertainment expense gamble and you want to throw some lineups into the flagship every night and that's kind of just fun money, lottery ticket kind of money, then so be it. But just be aware that it's a baseball in particular is an extremely high variance game and you should be mentally committing to the season and managing your bankroll in a way that is appropriate for that. For me, I stick to that 2.5 to 5% most slates. Actually, I stick to that every single slate and I try to get as many slates as I can down. So, but let's actually get into some more practical stuff here and start looking at contests. Okay, so I have my entries file uploaded. I am going to quickly show how you do this just in case you are unsure or haven't seen this before. So we do have tutorials in our documentation that explain how to reserve entries for a contest if you haven't done that before. Typically, we are going to recommend most people do register for contests ahead of time. The main reason why is it just makes it much easier to get your lineups once you've built them on SaberSim into the right contests. And if you are using contest sims, it makes sure that you are selecting the best possible lineups for each contest you're playing. So to do that, you click the download template or this little button, the upload entries here, download template file from whatever site you're playing on. And I suspect this is going to, oh, it didn't pull up DraftKings. Cool. That's great. I'm not logged into DK here. So but if you are logged into DK, hang on, now I'm getting two-factored. Okay, let me try this again. Okay. Let me know in chat too. Somebody say hello or say what's up, just so I know you guys are all here and you can hear me and everything's going good on the technical side here. Let me know if you're excited for opening day or how you feeling. Okay. Download template file is going to download the file right to your computer. Shady Advice is here. And then we're going to pull this in. So we pull in the entries file. Okay. So this is my entries file for what I'm playing for this slate. Now, there are a few principles, I think, to strong contest selection. The first is we want to play the easiest competition possible. There is no need to pitch yourself up against the Dodgers every single night when you have the opportunity to compete against little leaguers. That's my fun baseball analogy there. I've got a few of those tucked in here for today. Now, how do we do that? Well, both DraftKings and FanDuel have restrictions about what players can enter certain contests. So on DraftKings, under $3, players above a certain amount of lifetime winnings or entry fees cannot enter. Those players tend to be more skilled players. They have been playing DFS for a long time. They are harder to beat. They also restrict contests under $5 with less than a $25,000 prize pool. FanDuel has a very similar rule. I don't remember the word for word ruling that FanDuel has. I think it's very nearly identical in terms of that under $3 range, under $5 range. So those are the easiest contests to beat. And one of the things I will actually show in my contest flashback video once a few slates have passed, I can't show it yet here, but you can actually see this by looking at what the highest possible attainable ROI is from two contests that are very similar, one under the $3 threshold and one above that $3 threshold. It is a massive difference in terms of what is the ROI of the best possible lineup you could have played. Like sometimes it is double highest possible ROI in a low stakes contest compared to a higher stakes contest. So your entries, your contest selection system, you should be playing those contests that are filling those contests that are under the $3 range first. As number one, play easier competition, right? The second one is to get more at bats. Nobody's going to hit a home run every single night, every single entry you play, right? But over the course of the season, you string together hundreds of at bats. The best players are going to get their numbers. They're going to hit their home runs. This is the same way in DFS, is the exact same way. So the more lineups you can get into play with a certain amount of bankroll, the better served you are going to be on realizing your EV more quickly. That's kind of goes back to the commit to the season mindset thing, right? In the same way we want to commit to the season of I'm going to set myself up by playing a certain amount of bankroll that allows me to see as many slates as possible. In each slate you're playing, you want to see as many lineups as possible. You want to give yourself as many shots at that home run. So I think what that means on a practical level is one, playing the contests that are lower stakes first is going to have that effect too, right? $20 entered into the solo shot here, or $75 entered into this mini max is going to go farther than $20 entered into the flagship tournament, or $75 entered into the sorry, I lost my train of thought, into the flagship tournament. But along with that, it's embracing some of these 20 max and 150 max tournaments and playing a wide spectrum of different types of tournaments. An idea that you will hear from time to time is that you should be only playing single entry, or that single entry are the best possible contests to play. And I think that's a little bit misguided. You will see in something like Contest Flashback that single entry tournaments often have the highest possible ROI. Your ROI of lineups that you play into single entry tournaments will often be higher than what you will see in something like the mini max or the solo shot. However, you only get one lineup into those contests. It is a harder ROI to actually realize, right? So it is a balancing act of mixing together the single entry and 3 max along with the 20 max and 150 max tournaments. So two principles there: play easier competition and get more at bats, along with playing a amount of bankroll per slate that is appropriate to you. Now, if you are more drawn to single entry and 3 max types tournaments, it is fine to swing the balance of your personal portfolio more in the direction of those types of tournaments. If you like playing large field, 150 max, 20 max type tournaments, that's my preference. Then you can play more of those. You can allocate more of your bankroll towards those. But it is a balancing act between those two things. And I think your goal should be, when you sit down and look, these are the entries I'm playing each night, you should be able to really check 3 boxes. One is that you're playing an appropriate amount of bankroll that, like, if you lose on that slate, if you get dusted on that slate, you're not going to be devastated. You have played as many good tournaments under that $3 range or under the $5 with less than a $25,000 prize pool range as possible. I think I've actually literally maxed those here, playing every contest that they've offered or very close to it. And then 3, that you are getting as many unique lineups in play as possible. Oh, chat is popping off. All right. What's up, chat? Cool. I'm glad everyone is here. Yeah, Eric says the exact same entries file. Yeah, if you've been around for a while, this should be somewhat familiar. We've talked about this a lot, but I just want to preface this at the start of the season here by introducing this to people that haven't seen this before. Okay, so that is the entries file here. So now let's talk about actually building some lineups. Our core guiding principle for the way that you should be approaching builds is the build, review, revise system. Very important there is that build comes first. And this goes back to keeping it simple. On your very first builds, you should not be touching very much at all, to be quite honest. You will have the opportunity to iterate, add in your takes, change things that you want after we build lineups. And over time, as the season progresses, if you find that there are things that you do every single time that you build for baseball DFS, it's totally fine to add those in early. But do not come to the SaberSim optimizer with a laundry list of exposures you need to change, of stack rules you need to set, of a player pool that you need to curate, right? It is at best a waste of time. And at worst, you are diminishing the opportunity to see what the Sims think about the slate. The Sims, you should think about the Sims on their own as a research tool. The SaberSim is essentially your co-pilot in this case. It is offering suggestions about the way that you can play the slate. If you come in here and program everything up front, which you do need to do on an optimizer, it is a normal thing if you are new to SaberSim to think that is what you need to do. You are willingly giving up that opportunity to see what the Sims think about the slate. So when I sit down to build, even over the course, even by the time we get to July, my very first build often looks like one thing I have started doing here is just unchecking a player because it is a little bit faster to pass the DraftKings guidelines here. And then building lineups. And I'll change this here down to 5,000. And then hitting build. And no other changes for my very first build because I want to see what the Sims think. And a lot of times I learn something from this. There may be a particular slate where a stack type that I wasn't expecting is a little bit more viable, especially early in this season where team totals are a little bit lower. We might be a little more comfortable playing some unique stack types. There might be a particular pitcher that I wasn't even thinking about that shows up as an elite play based on the Sims. There might be a stack I wasn't even thinking about. I want to at least use this build here as an opportunity to get some information from and save myself some time. Right? There might be a player I'm like, I'm going to fade that guy. Well, the Sims are fading that guy anyway. Or I want to make sure I'm heavily exposed to Paul Skeens today. Well, the Sims are getting you there anyway. I don't need to set all of this up front. So we'll give this a second to build here and keep going. But I think the main takeaway there is really to at least give the Sims a chance to cook, and let see what you get out of that. One thing I'll mention here, my contest Sims are now kicking off automatically. We added this recently. There's a toggle now in the build settings. If you are a new SaberSim user and you're on SaberSim Ultimate, this will most likely be toggled on by default. I toggled this on recently, and it's kind of a nifty feature. So my contest Sims automatically kick off now when my build is complete. The contest Sims are quite valuable. I want to touch on what those are doing. So we now have a pool of 5,000 lineups here, each of which is essentially the best possible lineup you could have built for a given way this slate plays out. So you see right off the bat, right? We're getting good stacks here. We're not jamming a bunch of chalk plays in. We're getting lineups because of the Sims. We're getting lineups that balance ownership, that balance correlation, all those things together. The contest Sims are now going to grade these lineups based on how much expected money we are going to make for each of the different contests we are playing. Now, going back to my contest file here, I have a very diverse range of contests that I've entered. I have contests that have 50,000 entries in them. I have contests that have 490 entries in them. I have contests that pay at 20% to first. I have contests that pay 5% to first. These are a pretty diverse different type of contests that we are playing in this entries file here. All of these different contests have different optimal strategies associated with them. There is a way you want to play for a top-heavy, larger field tournament that is different than a way you want to play for maybe a flatter, smaller type tournament. All of that stuff is very hard to intuitively grasp the different strategies that it takes to be successful in each of these different tournaments. The contest Sims are attempting to solve that problem. So we are saying, for all 5,000 different lineups we've made, how would they perform in each of these different contests that I've entered? And the ROI is essentially that measurement. If the contest Sim was literally perfect, which it is not, and you had a perfect idea of what your opponents were going to play and perfect game Sims, it would essentially solve the puzzle of DFS and say, this is the most profitable way to play. Now, they're not always going to be perfect. That is where a lot of times you can add value, is picking up on things maybe in the projections that aren't perfect or in the field lineups or things like that. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit there. But it is going straight to the source and calculating what lineups are best. I will mention on this stream. We had a video come out yesterday about what's new for this season. I mentioned it there as well, but I'll mention it for those that haven't seen that yet. We reset everyone's trials for opening day today. So if you have tried contest sims before, decided it wasn't for you at that time, or maybe it wasn't financially, didn't make sense at the time, everyone gets a free 5-day trial to Ultimate for the start of the season. That is if you are a brand new customer to SaberSim, or like you don't currently have an active SaberSim subscription, or if you're currently on Starter or something like that, you can check out Ultimate for free for 5 days to see heading into baseball this year if you want to check it out. It is an extremely powerful tool. So contest sims are run here. And now what I tend to typically do is get an initial fill in, right? So the way I recommend doing that is using autofill, because it is going to be the best possible lineups make it into each entry that you are playing. So we have autofill. We are sorted by ROI, and we're using unique rank, which means that we're going to get a unique lineup put into each entry we're playing. And the way I typically like to do this is sort by prize pool and then save. So what this is going to do is it is going to take the best 20 lineups from my pool of 5,000 here for the 4-seamer, the 20 max, for that contest specific contest ROI. What are the most profitable lineups we can play for that specific contest? And then it's going to eliminate those 20 from being used again, and then go into this $1 mini max and put the best possible lineups into that contest as well. An alternative way you can do this if you want, I go back and forth between this, is instead filling your lineups by entry fee. So instead we would do the top 3 lineups into this home plate first and eliminate those from being used elsewhere, then into the base hit, then into the other base hit. I think either of those are fine, but what you're basically saying is I want to prioritize the contests first that are the most important to me, because either I've invested the most money or because they have the largest prize pool, and then put the best possible lineup into those contests and eliminate them from being used again, so that we are getting a unique lineup into each entry. I think either of these approaches, either sorting by free or sorting by prize pool, but most importantly using autofill and using unique rank, is the best possible way to fill your entries for the slate. One thing as a kind of a tiebreaker there, I will do is if I'm trying to think about the best way to put this. I don't like to eliminate 150 lineups very quickly in my fill process when it can be avoided. So sorting by prize pool here, you see by the time my 4th contest is filled, I'm going to have eliminated 321 lineups from my pool already, leaving a lot of these single entries to kind of get what's left. So if my higher dollar contests are single entry and 3 maxes for the most part, I'll tend to fill like this instead. So I think that is actually what I'll do here. And then I typically recommend getting these entered into your contest. So a useful feature here is to have Open DFS site on download toggled on in your settings menu in the upper right. And then it makes it very easy here to grab your entries file with the button in the upper left and get that uploaded here to DraftKings. Okay. So now I mentioned the build process is build, review, revise. We have done build. We are now ready to review and revise. Your goal with your lineups is to put strong lineups into your contests. At this point, you have done that. So if you don't have takes about the slate, about lineup construction, about what stacks you want to get over or under the field on, what players maybe you want to take a stand on, all that kind of stuff, you can functionally be done at this step. The next step, though, would be to make sure you are playing lineups that you like, that pass your research, that pass your intuition about the slate, that pass your gut feelings, anything like that. You can use SaberSim from this point on as a way to say, help me do what I want to do on this slate in the most profitable way. And that's what SaberSim really allows you to do here. So by default, we are getting what the Sims think is the most profitable way to play the slate. And we can add in any of our own individual takes from here. The way I typically tend to do this is, let me first get my exposure over here, because there are 3 columns that I kind of like looking at next to each other, is exposure, pool, and leverage. And then I tend to approach this, I think Andrew often calls it right to left with these tabs over here. I think you can also think about this as like macro to micro, where you're thinking about the lineups that you're playing from the widest lens to the most narrow lens. The widest lens of a way you can think about a lineup is the stacks that you are playing. What types of stacks are you getting to on the slate, right? So I will typically spend some time going through and reviewing these and seeing what types of stacks that I am getting here. So right off the bat, we see very heavily exposed to the types of stacks that if you have played baseball DFS before, you probably want in your lineups. Another indication of essentially the power of the Sims. We're getting 5-2 stacks, 5-3s, 4-3s, 5s, and then some of these smaller stacks starting to leak in. One of the things that I will often do here is quickly review these and make sure I'm happy with what we ended up with. We are getting a little trickle of some smaller type stacks showing up in the build. I often shift my opinion about this over the course of the season, and sometimes am more willing to play unconventional stacks and sometimes less willing to play them. I think for the start of the season, I am going to be a little opinionated here and eliminate some of these stacks that don't at least have, say, a 4 stack in them. I think something like this is probably what I would do here. Again, this is something I tend to change my mind on as the season goes along. On one side, I think there are probably plus EV creative stacks that you can play that are a little bit smaller, and the Sims seem to think that these lineups can be profitable when sprinkled in, but I tend to be a little more selective about the stacks I'm playing. So I want a 4 stack in each lineup. Now, when you're using autofill to actually get this to go through, you need to do another save. So I get in this iterative process of going through, of unchecking something or changing something over here, and then going through and doing another save. And now we can see how our exposure has changed. And actually, just to make sure that this I don't have other stacks end up sneaking in here, I'm just going to only check the stacks that I actually want to see. So now if I make other adjustments here, I won't have anything else show up. So now we can go to the next step. What is one lens more narrow than thinking about the lineup constructions, the stack types themselves? It is the team stacks. I typically skip over the game section. I don't think this is super useful for baseball because we don't really have a lot of opposing team correlations in baseball. The Angels are not in any meaningful way correlated to the White Sox. This is something that maybe you think about a little bit more for something like football, but I tend to go over and then look at the team stacks, right? So now we're looking at the team stacks. If you had opinions about what stacks you wanted to get exposure to here, this is a great way to start doing that. So you see I'm pretty nicely diversified right out of the gate here, with max stack exposure to any given team as 27%. Me personally, that's the main thing I look for in the team stacks section. Is I often am not coming at this from a strong stance of, I know that I want the Mets very heavily tonight, so I'm going to bump up my exposure to the Mets. I'm more looking at this as, what do my exposures look like with the expectation that most slates, this is going to be pretty flat. So that's kind of the main thing that I tend to look for at the team stacks exposure. If you have a slate where you have your top exposed stack is 40, 50%, and then it drops down to 20% as your next stack, that's often a flag to me of something that I want to look at. Like sometimes it's as simple as saying, oh, that's the Dodgers at Coors Field with a 7.5 implied run total. Sure, I'm in. Other times that looks a little weird, and that might be a spot where I want to at least look a little closer and maybe bring down some of my exposure there. But this is where you would want to bring in some of your opinions, takes, research, anything like that about your stack types. Maybe you want to be a little more exposed to the Braves, right? A general thing that I often like to do, or at least consider, is getting a little over the field on good teams with lower run totals. Teams that I just think are talented, full of good hitters. The Braves definitely clear that bar. And maybe I want to get some exposure to the Braves. I'm at 6%. They're one of my lower exposed teams. A useful tool that I often use to kind of decide how much exposure I want to get to is the pool exposure column, which shows you how many lineups in your pool have that particular team in them. Right. So again, what we're looking at here is we had a pool of 5,000 lineups that is representative of the sims, the baseball sims themselves saying this is what the range of outcomes of the slate looks like. This is what could happen. So those sims are saying 14% Braves stacks are showing up. Now the contest sims are saying for your contest portfolio, the best lineups that you can play feature about 6% Braves. But if I want to get a little bit more of that, maybe I think that this run total is actually a little bit low, or that I think they're going to come in lower ownership than expected. I like to use the pool exposure as a benchmark of how much exposure to get. So if I wanted a little bit more Braves, we can set that to 15 and then go ahead and hit another save. Now, I've done this personally less and less as our sims have gotten better, as our models have gotten better, as our field lineups have gotten better. I have gotten increasingly more and more trusting of what the sims think. However, if this is a stand you want to take, what SaberSim is going to do for you is say, okay, you want 15% Braves. Here is the most profitable portfolio of 377 lineups for your given contest that you can play, where 15% of them feature Brave stacks. And I think that is a very empowering thing to understand about the way that SaberSim is working here, is that you can do that. You can make these stands, make these takes, and know that you are doing it consistently in the most profitable way. Right? Now, calling back to where we started here with the keep it simple thing, right? Maybe you approach this slate and said, I know I want to be over the field on Braves. Had you put that in early, maybe along with a bunch of other exposures, you would have missed out on the information that the sims alone, at least at the moment, do not think that being over the field on the Braves is the best way to play this slate. It is, I think, worthwhile having gotten that bit of information. And that's why I like to keep the process of building simple and don't put too much in ahead of time. So I'm going to remove that because I'm actually not going to take that stand here. And then now the next step is to go to the individual players, right? This is the most micro level that you can think about your lineups, is individual player exposure. Personally, for me, and probably what I recommend, is I tend to think about hitters entirely from the lens of the stacks that I am getting to. So I really only ever look at individual player exposures for pitchers. It is totally fine to look at individual hitters if you have takes about individual hitters, but I think that gets pretty unwieldy pretty quickly and hard to think about. And I am far more likely to have an opinion about the Mets stacks as a whole than I am Juan Soto exposure. So I tend to look at this from the pitchers in particular. And I like to look at this starting with the leverage column and see which exposures I am getting most over or under, or which pitchers I'm getting most over or under the field to. So your leverage column is your exposure minus the pool, or I'm sorry, minus the ownership projection. It is how high you are over or under the field on any particular player. And I just like to do a quick glance at this and make sure that this checks out with any takes or ideas that I have about the slate. This early in the season, I'm probably not going to have many of those, but things that I'll tend to look for after is sometimes injuries, pitcher injuries or recent injuries. We do pick up on pitch counts, expected pitch limits, things like that in the Sims, but those can sometimes be somewhat volatile situations. If I am over the field on a pitcher that I know has a pitch count going into that particular slate, I might want to take a quick glance on that and just see, like, is it a salary thing? Is it an ownership thing? What's going on here? And just make sure that this checks out with any takes that I have about these pitchers on the slate. Another thing that I like to do here is get a sense of where I stand relative to the highest and lowest projected pitchers on the slate, right? Like, is there any significant fade that SaberSim wants to take? It always jumps out to me if there is a very highly owned projected pitcher that we are taking a very big negative stand on. That sometimes is something that I maybe want to get a little bit closer to ownership on. So often my adjustments to pitchers are ways that make the leverage column get closer to zero, I guess, than further away. That is just kind of a personal take of mine. But this is really your opportunity to make your build your own. You should be applying your takes, your opinions about the slate, about lineup construction, about the team stacks, about pitchers, whatever. And SaberSim will help guide you to the most profitable way to do that. Now, if you are highly opinionated about a slate and you have made a lot of adjustments, you will sometimes see this message. I'm going to make it pop up here. That says, let's see. There was probably an easier way for me to make this pop up. This can't meet exposures. This basically means that we can't find lineups that do what you are trying to do with them. When this happens, what I'm going to actually uncheck Drew Smith because I don't want him to actually show up in your lineup, in my lineups. But what you should do at this point is click rebuild lineups. And this is going to take everything you have done thus far, now use it as a baseline and build another pool of lineups for you. So if you want some exposure to some stacks that the Sims didn't like on their own, you've made a bunch of adjustments to pitcher exposures, you've very heavily limited your stacks. Maybe you've done only 5 3 stacks or only 5 2 stacks. You get to a certain point and you may see this point reached more quickly if you're on something like the starter plan and your pool is only 500 lineups. And SaberSim can't find any lineups for you to put in and listen to all those different exposures. Now, when we do this ensuing build here, we're going to use what you have done so far as a baseline and build a pool that is more built around the way that you see the slate. So if you are a more opinionated player, there is a process of iteration here where I think you do some builds, you make some adjustments, you see how your lineups look, then you rebuild, make any additional adjustments. Either way, though, you are, whoops, hang on. Oh, my contest sims are running. I was like, what's going on here? Either way, what you are getting out of that is 1, saving the time of having to put in all that information ahead of time, and 2, at each step, getting the information from the Sims about, okay, now this is the best way to play based on what I have done so far, right? Like you may have an opinion about what stacks you want to play for a particular slate and not realize that that requires you to reach all of your desired stack exposures. That requires you to fade guys like Paul Skeens because you don't have the pitcher salary left available, right? I think it's very easy for players to have an opinion about all these different exposures they want to achieve on a slate and not always realize the effect of those exposures until the lineups have actually been built that accommodate those exposures, right? You may want exposure to all of these different hitters that are quite expensive. That means you are now essentially fading the best projected pitcher on the slate. Are you okay with that? These incremental builds give you that information in a way that is really helpful. So I think that's another reason why you want to start with less and add on more and more as you iterate through a build process here. Cool. Okay. Once you have reached the point where you are satisfied with your exposures. So I typically, once I have done the things that I want to do, I will often go through and kind of do one more round of looking through. Do one more fill, and we save here. And one more upload. And we are good to go. Okay, one other thing I want to touch on here, and then I see some questions here. So if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. This is a good time to do it. We'll get to questions in a second here. One other thing I wanted to touch on, I probably should have mentioned this before, is when you sit down to build, I think it's a good idea to take a look at the confirmed starting lineups for teams. Today will probably be very easy because all of the games start at the exact same time. We are very likely here in the next couple hours to have starting lineups for everyone. But let's say lock was right now. I like to make a mental note of the teams that don't have confirmed starting lineups out as a reminder that I need to be aware of that information coming in later to react to that with quick swaps and late swaps. I will have a video I mentioned here at the top of the stream coming out most likely tomorrow that is very similar to what we've done here today, but it is my late swapping process, which is pretty simple, very similar to what we just watched here. But part of that is setting yourself up for success and knowing what teams can potentially be the late swap teams. Like anybody can get scratched. That can happen to any team. But if it were locking right now, I would be particularly aware of like the Phillies, Braves, Mets as teams that are going to have confirmed starting lineups come out that could be different than what was expected. And that's going to need a late swap. Also a good idea too, to just make sure this is actually, here's a notification that I got from yesterday that your player notifications are on. Very helpful way to just be notified that you need to react in the form of late swap to breaking news. So, okay. So that's it. That is very representative of what my process looks like every single night. And it is, I think, simpler than people think. I know we've been talking here for about 40 minutes, so maybe it doesn't feel simple right now. But if we boiled this down to actually me just stepping through it most nights, it takes me about 10 minutes to build my lineups. It is build, review, revise. I build, I go through, I take a glance at my stack exposures. I go through and I take a look at my team stacks and my pitcher exposures. And if I have a lean or anything jumped out to me as I was looking over the slate, make a couple tweaks and get those things into contests and play with a season long perspective. So I'm playing an amount of bankroll that I'm comfortable losing any single night. And I'm playing with the idea that 1 or 2 nights over the course of the season are going to be the times where I really have the opportunity to realize my EV and take something down. And meanwhile, playing a contest portfolio that allows me to get a ton of shots on goal, a ton of at-bats in a given slate, and pits me up against the easiest competition, the contests that are free from the sharks, so to speak. So, okay. I'm going to now use the next little bit of time here to answer some questions. Let me make this a little easier for me to read here and see what we got. Hang on. What's going on here? Sorry guys, hang on. My the chat that I'm seeing doesn't seem to be loading here well. Let me try something real quick. I'm gonna refresh and see what happens here. Okay, that did fix it here. Let me fix this now. Sorry about that. Bring that back. Okay. All right. Let's see. Any questions? Lartar said 100% Marlins today. Yeah, I will. I think this is in jest, but I will mention that, like, first of all, in baseball, you can have some fun like that and be okay. And I don't know if you come up with 377 Marlin stacks that are profitable according to the contest sims, but you certainly could come up with a few. And SaberSim again will help you find the most profitable ways to do that. I think that is. I used the word empowering earlier. I think that's the right way to think about it. Is that if you want to do that, especially in a sport like baseball, the contest sims will really help you find the most profitable way to do that, and it's quite a bit of fun. So I did. Last maybe 2 seasons ago, I went on a run over the course of the week where I just felt like for a few consecutive slates that the pitching was really bad and that the chalk was condensing on, in DraftKings specifically, on like SP2 type players that were slightly underpriced, that kind of sucked, and we're playing against bad teams, and everybody assumed that the pitchers were going to be successful. So every single one of those slates, my top exposure was the team hitting against the chalky SP2. And I like banked 2 tournaments in the same week doing that, and then just ran crazy hot the rest of them. We don't really have that slate today. I guess it would be Kikuchi if you wanted to pick one of those guys. So I would say my like for fun stand today, if I am to take one, is White Sox stacks, because I like picking on the chalky SP2 type guy. Any tips for the OG plan users? Yeah, so I wasn't explicit about this as we were going through. The process should be the exact same. The only difference is that instead of using a specific ROI measurement from the contest sims, you are using a generalized measurement of lineup quality from SaberScore. SaberScore was back tested using contest sims. So we basically said if we take all of the slates that took place over a given season and built lineups for all of them, what are the characteristics of the lineups that tend to be the most profitable according to the contest sims? They have a certain and then this is basically the regression of that analysis. So the best possible lineups you can make on average for a large field, large slate baseball factor in projection at 0.3, lineup percentiles at 0.7, and ownership at minus 0.6. So it's a slightly more generalized view of the contest sims. And the process behind it in terms of build, review, revise, and then review your lineups from macro to micro is the same. Adam says, is baseball still all bottom up projections, or is SaberSim now doing any integrating or props? Oh, good question. That is a really good question. I will probably need to follow up on that. I do not believe that we have implemented the same Vegas changes to baseball as we have for other sports. So if you missed it, our NFL and NBA models, well, actually specifically NFL, our NFL model is now very heavily Vegas weighted. It is essentially a Vegas model. Still bottom up in the sense that we are simulating the games play by play for football, but the simulations are guided towards reaching targets set by the Vegas markets. Basketball is very similar. However, we are relying on our analyst team to provide some of the initial inputs to things like fantasy point per minute and minutes, and we are more willing to take a stand against the market if that is what our projections team, our analyst team believes. Baseball has Vegas backstops in it where we will not get too far away from something like an implied team total on a given team. But I believe of those three sports, it is the most originating sport in terms of our projections. But I will check on that and make sure. Love playing with the custom field sims. Now need them for every slate, not the main slates. I believe you can build custom fields for any slate. If you are talking specifically about the custom fields that you sim against, you should be able to do those for any slate that we have ownership for. If you are an elite subscriber referring to the custom sims, that may very well be main slate only for now. But do I create or use build templates much? They can be very useful as just a way to speed up your process a bit as you get. So I mentioned here that once you have a few slates under you and you've played a few slates and maybe there are things that you're finding yourself doing every single time, I think they can be very useful as a way to just load those in. A build template that I am somewhat likely to use at some point this season would be one that basically just unchecks a certain type of stack. So probably something like this. Save this as a build template, and it just saves a step later. So I think it can be pretty useful for that. So it does save a little bit of time there. Cameron, is making minor projection changes before you build a good way to tell SaberSim you like without being restrictive? I would still do an initial build without having done that. And in fact, if you are coming to SaberSim with a different set of projections you want to use, maybe it's the bat or something like that, that's totally fine. I think that's a perfectly fine way to use it. I think you should still give yourself the benefit of seeing a totally blank build first. See what the sims like. See what our models say, and just use that as a data point. It's just useful. It's information that you have basically for free as a part of your process that you should at least intake and incorporate. And then from there, do whatever you want. So I like the first build with no changes, but then from there, projection changes either by hand, where you're tweaking a handful of projections on players, or maybe you're doing team total projections, or maybe you're uploading a different set of projections. Whatever you want to do, that's perfectly fine. And it is actually one of the least restrictive ways, as long as your projections are good. Things like lineup rules and exposures are definitely a lot more restrictive in terms of telling what the builder it can and can't do. But with projections, you are saying like, no, these are the true means for all the players and teams on the slate. Now, SaberSim, you build the lineups that are the best for that. So actually, projections are probably less restrictive than things like exposures and lineup rules. So perfectly fine to do that, but give yourself the benefit of seeing of using the data point for the sims. So switch that. Also, your opinions on what stack types you prefer to change as the season goes along, what things develop that lead to those changes. I wish I had like a really compelling answer to you for what. Sometimes it's just vibes. Like I just change my mind sometimes as the season goes along. There inevitably comes this point in the season where I'm like, what if I play some 3-3 stacks? And I just want to try it and I experiment with it for a little bit. And then I come off of it at some point and get more pulled into these types of stacks. I if I can give you an honest answer, the more quantitative thing that would actually make me shift my opinion over the course of the season is using contest flashback to see what the best players are doing. That's probably the most meaningful thing. And I will have a video coming out tomorrow talking about contest flashback and that side of it. But that is actually what has a more quantitative effect of shifting my opinion over the course of the season, is if I see that the highest sim ROI players in the flagship every night have extremely limited their stack types and are playing a very narrow range of stacks, then I'm probably going to start to get more narrow. If they are opening up their stack types, then I might get a little more open. I would say as a general trend that I have seen recently, I actually think the top players are getting more restrictive with their stack types as time goes along. That is a general trend that I've seen. Sometimes extremely restrictive, like 5-2s and 5-3s only. So I still like, especially early in the season when the team totals are a little bit lower, I'm quite a bit more comfortable playing stacks that are like more 4-2s, 4-2-2s, kind of hoping that there isn't a 5-stack worthy team on the slate. But general trends, I have noticed that the best sim ROI players are getting more restrictive with their stack types. Corey, any tips on using min uniques? Yes, that's a good thing for us to touch on here. Okay. So I think there are kind of two. Where's min uniques? Right. I don't know where the autofill min uniques are. Oh, right here. Okay. If you are using contest sims, I have not and probably will not be using min uniques. Simple as that. You can. You're likely to sacrifice very little by using them. And in fact, you're probably likely to see that they don't really change very much until you get about to the point that would have been too far anyway. Too far meaning like you're likely to see that if you on a big contest portfolio, you bump up min uniques 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you'll see this like huge drop off that happens like somewhere between 4 and 6. The reason for that is the contest sims now are picking up on how many lineups that you are playing into a given contest and accounting for the way that we calculate the ROI for your lineups in those contests, knowing that you're playing a portfolio of them. I think the simplest way to think about this is, let's say for the mini max, for example, where you're playing 150 lineups. And let's say you were grading all the lineups in your pool in a vacuum for the mini max. And of your 5,000 lineup pool, there are 100 of them that are all very profitable. They grade out very profitable, and they are all Marlin stacks. They all have this very narrow win condition, basically saying the Marlins are undervalued. And if you play Marlin stacks, you're not going to cash often, but you're going to have a very high ROI because you're likely to have a very, very high score when they go off. You're getting like the double leverage on Paul Skeens. You're getting very low owned hitters, all of that good stuff. The contest sims are going to pick up on the fact that to realize your EV when that win condition actually happens, you do not need to play 100 Marlin stacks. even though the top 100 ROI lineups in your pool for that contest might all be Marlins stacks. So it's going to naturally diversify you. You're going to get some exposure there, but you're not going to just literally play the top 150 ROI lineups. That is new from last MLB season. That is a new change. So if you played last MLB with us and you are coming back and you didn't play football or basketball or anything like that, that is new. If you watched my MLB content from last year, it is very min uniques focused because that didn't exist. And you needed a way to tell SaberSim, I don't need to play 100 lineups that all have basically the same win condition in my portfolio. And min uniques was a blunt force way of doing that. I don't think you need to do that now. If you are using SaberScore, I think min uniques can still be valuable. And I think your approach to them should be kind of letting your exposures guide that decision making. So you'll see, even actually let's do a fill and see what our exposures look like with one min unique using SaberScore. So we're actually still pretty diversified here. All things considered, let's see our exposures to the pitchers. Yeah, we're actually still pretty diversified here, showing that there's kind of a lot of different ways to play the slate. I would use min uniques if you're using SaberScore incrementally and maybe set up some metrics with something like maybe your average SaberScore and your min SaberScore, and increment your min uniques up by 1. Maybe not even 1. You don't need to do like 1 and fill, 1 and fill, 1 and fill, but just get a sense of how each point of diversification you add with min uniques affects your SaberScores, and find where maybe a break point is where there is a lot of drop off. And that's probably about as high as I would go with min uniques. I touched on this earlier here. The SaberScores are basically contest sim regressions. So we will run back tests on an entire season and see what lineups grade out the best with using the contest sims for those individual slates, and then attempt to regress them, or not even really attempt to. This is just literally what we do, and figure out like the coefficients of these metrics that lead to, on average, the highest contest sim ROI lineups. Okay. Adam said maybe early in the season, more casuals, meaning non-stack lineups, and thus more value in 5-mans when everyone's doing it later in the season. Yeah, maybe. That makes sense. HC said, how about the use of filters like ROI or geomean? I don't think geomean is going to matter at all here. Maybe in something like Showdown, but I've even come off of it a little bit there. I'll probably do a baseball Showdown video sometime this spring or summer here as well. I don't use it for main slates at all. ROI filters, I don't really use them as much anymore. And the main reason why is because let me think about the right way to put this. So when you're using autofill, you're getting the best possible lineup based on your ROI in each contest, listening to your exposures and min uniques and things like that. But the best lineup by the home plate ROI is going there. The best lineup by the base hit ROI is going there. The best lineup by this base hit's going there. And when you filter on ROI, you are filtering, like, you kind of have to pick an ROI to filter by, or use just your generalized ROI. I just don't think knowing that the best possible lineups are going into each contest, I don't think the filter just trims off the bottom range that you would not have used anyway. So I don't think it is a mistake to use a filter if it gives you some meaningful information about your lineup portfolio. I don't, because I haven't needed, there hasn't been any information that gives me lately. So it is not wrong. It is possibly unnecessary, is probably the way that I would put it. So All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. We are right at about the hour mark. I will call out again that Andrew will be going live for office hours, I think, in about 1 hour from right now. So if you have more questions, you're gearing up for baseball, you're getting your initial builds in, and you want to see some more, ask some more baseball questions, that's your next best resource is office hours with Andrew in an hour from now. Stay tuned for videos coming out tomorrow that will be a more polished and permanent video version of what you just watched here, where we're talking about contest selection, we're talking about building lineups, that kind of stuff. Also a late swap guide that will probably come out tomorrow evening, because I'm going to attempt to do that live for the slate tomorrow evening. And then a contest flashback video that will probably come out in the afternoon, and it will be a contest flashback for this slate. So me going through and walking through contest flashback for basically what ended up shaking out here on this slate. I think that's it. I mentioned free trials have been reset for everybody. So if you want to check out the contest sims, you're not currently on Ultimate, and you want to use Ultimate for the first 5 days of the season for free, you can do that now. You can upgrade in the app or email us, support@sabersim.com. You can ask questions in Discord as you are building your lineups as the season starts to heat up. And in the meantime, thank you for everybody hanging out this past hour. Good luck on opening day. Good luck this season. Remember to think about it from the seasonal perspective, commit to the season, and I will see y'all next time. See ya.